I'm Claire Benton, 36 years old. I stood just inside my sister's kitchen, clutching a carefully wrapped present. My niece's birthday party was in full swing behind me. I could hear laughter clinking glasses, children shouting for more cake. Then Melissa's voice cut through the noise, clear and sharp. Still playing house with your cats, instead of having a real family? Everyone turned their eyes on me. That was the moment years of swallowing my pride finally caught up with me. Before I tell you more, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and tap that subscribe button. If you've ever had to find courage in a room full of people who think you don't belong, I grew up in a quiet corner of suburban Massachusetts, just outside Worcester, where families planted maple trees in their front yards and everyone waved on their evening walks. My parents, Joan and Richard, always said kindness mattered more than anything. They believed in hard work, humility, and family. Above all else, Melissa, my older sister by 3 years, took after our mom. She was the one with perfect posture, the sunniest smile, and a talent for making friends wherever she went. From the time we were little, the neighborhood expected certain things. Melissa was the cheerleader homecoming queen, and later the wife of a man whose family owned half the car dealerships in New England. David Carter seemed born to charm, hosting barbecues in their sprawling colonial house with the kind of yard you only see in magazines. Their home sparkled with white furniture and fresh flowers. The driveway was always lined with shiny new cars. My world was different. My apartment in Boston's Back Bay fits into their garage with room to spare. I chose it for the sunlight and the little window seat where my 3 rescue cats, Willow Socks and Rusty, spend their afternoons. I worked long nights at the animal hospital, finished my residency, and eventually became head of feline medicine in a city where people bring in pets with monogrammed carriers and treat their tabby's birthday like a national holiday. I loved my job every bit as much as I loved my quiet evenings with a book. A cup of tea and the rumble of purring nearby family gatherings were always a careful dance. Melissa with her perfect children, Lily and Ben, always seemed to have something subtle to say about my life choices last Christmas. She told me it was nice. I'd finally put effort into my appearance. Maybe you'll meet someone now. My parents, well-meaning, as ever, smiled and said they hoped I'd find the right man soon. When I mentioned a promotion at work, Melissa called it, "Your little cat doctor job." The message was always the same. My accomplishments were fine for someone passing the time, but not quite the same as settling down. When the invitation for Lily's 8th birthday came, it included a link to an approved gift list. Everything was bright pink, plastic expensive. I spent days searching for something Lily would truly love, finally settling on a children's microscope with slides to explore the world around her. I wrapped it in purple paper, tied it with a silver ribbon, and drove to the party, rehearsing small talk and neutral answers. In my head, Melissa's house looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. I stepped into a room filled with parents in designer clothes and children in princess dresses. David caught my eye first. He looked tired, but smiled and waved. "Claire, thank God you're here," he said between the unicorns and the bounce house. "I need an adult who isn't here for the wine." I spotted Lily near the gift table. She ran over in her sparkling dress and hugged me tight. "Aunt Claire, you came? Mom said you might have to work." I hugged her back, promised I'd always show up for her. Then Melissa approached, wine glass in hand. "Oh, you brought something not on the list." Her smile was tight as ever. I tried to keep my tone even, told her the party looked beautiful. She waved it off. "David always goes overboard." She leaned in, lowered her voice. "Mom and Dad should be here soon. You know how much they love these big family moments." As the afternoon wore on, I tried to keep to the edges, talking with Lily, meeting other parents, watching as Melissa floated from guest to guest. When it was time for presents, I watched from the back as Lily opened dollhouses, luxury toy cars, and stacks of pink boxes. Finally, David handed her my purple package from Aunt Claire. He said Lily opened it, eyes wide as she realized what it was. "A real microscope," she whispered, "like the scientists use." I knelt beside her and explained the slides, told her we'd look at hair and leaves together next time she visited. That's when Melissa's voice carried across the room. "Well, isn't that educational trust, Claire, to give homework instead of a toy still playing house with your cats, instead of having a real family?" Laughter echoed off the walls. My cheeks burned as I stood there, the weight of every family dinner, every backhanded compliment pressing down the old ache, growing sharper as I saw my parents smiling indulgently at Melissa's joke. I excused myself, my heart pounding, slipping down the hall to the guest bathroom, staring at my own reflection, wondering how I'd let things go on this way for so long. I sat in the bathroom staring at my own reflection, the light overhead sharp on the marble countertop. The voices from the party drifted in and out, laughter rising and falling behind the closed door. My hands trembled as I wiped my eyes, careful not to smudge the small bit of mascara I'd managed that morning. I pressed my palms against the cool counter, willing myself to steady. Outside, I could hear Emily's voice, bright and excited, talking about her microscope to anyone who would listen. I wondered if she even noticed the way the room had shifted when Melissa made her joke, or if she simply enjoyed her new treasure blissfully unaware. The shame that burned through me wasn't new. It was as familiar as the sound of my sister's laughter or the look of pride on my mother's face when Melissa entered a room. It went all the way back to childhood, to science fairs where my parents could barely make time to attend, while every one of Melissa's cheerleading competitions drew their enthusiastic cheers. Even at home, the walls seemed to echo the difference. Melissa's room, filled with trophies and photos, was always immaculate with the best view of the backyard. Mine was smaller, tucked at the end of the hall, covered in drawings of animals and stacks of library books. I learned early on how to fade into the background to make myself useful without making waves. When I left for college, I thought things might change. That distance and independence would mean I'd be seen for who I was, not just who I wasn't. Instead, the gulf only widened. Melissa married David right out of college, and suddenly her world grew even bigger. Family gatherings revolved around their children, Lily and Ben, and the growing list of milestones, birthdays, recitals, first steps. Each one celebrated as though it were a national holiday. My news, when I had any to share, felt small by comparison. The congratulations for my new job or published article always came with a smile and a gentle nudge to not work too hard, or the suggestion that maybe I'd find someone special if I put myself out there more. The message was never spoken outright, but it hovered in the air, impossible to ignore. My life was something to be endured until it started to resemble theirs. I took a few more deep breaths, listening to the water drip steadily from the faucet, then smoothed my dress and opened the door. In the hallway, I could see parents gathered near the dining room, their voices blending into a hum of polite conversation. A few heads turned as I walked by, eyes flicking quickly away, but one or two met my gaze and held it, a flicker of discomfort or pity showing before they turned back to their plates. I kept my head high, moving back toward the party, determined not to let anyone see how rattled I felt. In the kitchen, David stood at the counter refilling glasses. His shoulders a little slumped, as though he'd just finished a long day at work instead of hosting a party. "Hey, Claire," he said quietly, glancing over. "You doing okay?" I nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. "Melissa gets carried away sometimes," he offered, voice low. "Don't let her get to you." I managed a faint smile. "It's nothing I haven't heard before." He gave me a sympathetic look before heading outside to help the caterers. His words echoed through he'd noticed. Maybe more people saw than I realized. Lily came running into the kitchen, her curls bouncing her face lit up with excitement. "Aunt Claire, look. I wrote down everything I see with the microscope. I want to show you." She pulled out a small spiral notebook, the cover decorated with stickers. I knelt beside her as she eagerly turned the pages, explaining her findings: petals, crumbs, a strand of hair. She chattered on about her plans to bring the microscope to show and tell her enthusiasm, a balm against the sting of humiliation. I glanced up to see Melissa watching us from across the room, wineglass in hand, her expression unreadable. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I stayed close to Lily, helping her label new discoveries, doing my best to keep my focus on her instead of the adult conversations swirling around us. Occasionally, I caught snippets of my mother's voice recounting Melissa's latest committee or Ben's soccer championship. I hovered at the edge of the group, never quite sure where to stand or how to join in. Every so often, a relative would ask if I'd met anyone special yet, or if my work at the animal hospital kept me too busy for a social life. I learned to give polite, vague answers, smiling as though the questions didn't sting. I let their comments pass over me, letting the hum of the party muffle my feelings. After all, it was easier to play the role they'd assigned me, the reliable unmarried aunt who always brings a thoughtful gift, than to argue for a different version of myself. When the last of the cake was served and the guests began to trickle out, I found myself standing alone by the bay window, looking out at the backyard now littered with party favors and empty plates. Melissa came to stand beside me, setting her empty glass on the sill. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice softer than before. "Lily always looks forward to seeing you." I nodded, unsure what to say. She didn't apologize for her earlier comment, but she didn't repeat it either. In that moment, I felt a wave of exhaustion, not just from the day, but from the years of small wounds that never seemed to heal. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, the sky was streaked with gold and violet, the city humming with weekend traffic. I let myself in, dropped my keys on the entry table, and was immediately greeted by Willow's familiar meow. Socks came trotting down the hall, tail high and rusty, stretched from his cushion in the window, eyes half closed in contentment. I knelt to scratch their heads, grateful for their quiet, steady presence. As I changed into comfortable clothes, I replayed the day's events in my mind, the laughter, the looks, Melissa's words, and felt the ache settle in my chest. I heated up some leftover soup and curled onto the couch, my cats finding their usual places around me. The apartment was quiet, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet, filled with small comforts that were mine alone. Later that night, I called Megan, my best friend since college. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with concern. "How'd it go?" I hesitated, then let the details spill out, every awkward moment, every joke, every attempt to brush it off. Megan listened, offering small sounds of understanding as I spoke. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "It's not you," she said finally. "You know that, right? You could win a Nobel Prize and they'd still ask when you're getting married. It's their problem, not yours." I knew she was right, but the sting of old habits is slow to fade. After the call, I sat on the balcony for a long while, watching the lights in the apartment buildings across the street. Somewhere a siren wailed, then faded into the distance. I thought about the different kinds of loneliness, being alone because you want to be, and being alone even in a room full of people. Tonight I'd felt the second kind, the kind that lingers even after you're home, even after you've surrounded yourself with everything that feels safe. The next morning I woke early sunlight filtering through the blinds, Willow purring against my arm. I moved slowly through my routine, grateful for a quiet Sunday. I read through messages from colleagues at the animal hospital congratulating me on a recent article. I started a new book, made coffee, and took the time to appreciate each small, ordinary comfort. The pain of the party was still there, but it felt less sharp, dulled by the distance and by the rhythm of my own life. I wondered if things would ever change, if I'd ever stop feeling like the outsider at my own family's table. But for now, I let the calm of the morning settle over me and told myself it was enough. Sleep came slowly that night. I lay in bed with Willow pressed against my hip socks, curled in the crook of my knees, and Rusty purring quietly by my feet. The apartment was silent, except for the occasional rumble of the old radiator and the faint buzz of a streetlight outside my window. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the party in my mind, every detail sharper in the darkness. Melissa's voice echoed not just from that afternoon, but from all the years before. Birthday dinners, holidays, even ordinary Sundays when some small remark would cut just deep enough to sting. Those moments didn't seem to fade with time. Instead, they stacked up one on top of another until they felt impossible to carry. I got up before dawn, brewing coffee in the quiet kitchen, careful not to disturb the cats. I looked over at the drawings Lily had given me, each one carefully colored and signed with her looping handwriting. She'd drawn a cat in a superhero cape saving the day. I traced my finger over the lines, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just a bit. Even in the hard moments, Lily's affection made it a little easier to breathe. As Sunday unfolded, I tried to shake off the heaviness from the day before. I walked to the corner bakery for a fresh loaf of bread and stopped at the florist for a bunch of tulips, something bright to bring a little color to my living room. On my way home, I ran into Marcus, the security guard from my building. He always greeted me with the same gentle smile, asking after the cats or sharing a quick story about his own grandkids. "Rough day?" he asked, reading the lines on my face. "Family stuff," I replied. He nodded, not pressing for details. "Those cats of yours always know how to fix things," he said, and I managed a grateful smile. In that brief exchange, I felt more seen than I had all weekend. The next morning, I tried to lose myself in work. The animal hospital was busy with appointments and surgeries, and my mind slipped into familiar routines. I checked lab results, comforted anxious pet owners, and gave advice to a new tech still learning the ropes. In those moments, I felt grounded, valued for what I could do and who I was. My coworkers treated me as an equal, not as a curiosity or a cautionary tale. When I shared lunch with Dr. Patricia Gray, my longtime mentor, she listened as I described the party, her eyes kind but sharp with understanding. "Your life is not a consolation prize, Claire," she told me, her voice steady. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Her words stayed with me long after I left her office. Still at night, the old ache crept in. I wondered why the approval of people who rarely understood me still mattered so much. I thought about my parents' voices, soft but insistent, as they reminisced about Melissa's latest successes or offered gentle hints about how nice it would be to have more grandchildren. I remembered the quiet dinners at their house, where conversation drifted away from my job or my friends and always circled back to what was missing, at least in their eyes. For years, I'd tried to ignore those slights, telling myself that being part of the family meant letting some things go. But lately, that silence felt less like patience and more like erasure. That week, I found myself withdrawing, making excuses not to join Melissa and my mother for brunch or to attend my nephew's soccer game. Instead, I buried myself in research for an upcoming conference and lost track of time writing an article on feline cardiology. At home, I let myself be quiet, moving through the motions of my own life without having to measure it against anyone else's. It should have been enough, but I still felt the old pull, hoping somewhere in the back of my mind that maybe things would shift if I tried a little harder or said the right thing. One evening, as I was winding down for the night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Megan. "Thinking about you. Dinner this week." I hesitated, then agreed, grateful for her persistence. When we met at our favorite Italian place 2 nights later, she listened as I poured out my frustration, the words tumbling out in a rush. She didn't offer easy answers or try to fix what couldn't be fixed. Instead, she simply sat across from me, her hand resting on mine for a moment. "You're not the only one who feels this way," she said. "Sometimes the people who love us most can't see us clearly." Her reassurance didn't solve everything, but it softened the sharpest edges. That night after dinner, I walked home alone, the city lights casting soft halos on the damp sidewalks. For the first time in days, I let myself feel the sadness without trying to push it away. I realized how much of my life had been spent making peace with other people's expectations, shrinking to fit spaces where I didn't quite belong, letting silence fill the gaps where I should have spoken up. I understood deep down that something needed to change. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of other people's disappointment forever. As the week went on, small signs of hope appeared. Dr. Gray invited me to speak at a local college, sharing my experience with students interested in veterinary medicine. I spent an afternoon preparing my notes, reminded of how far I'd come in my field and how much I had to offer. Lily called one evening, her voice bubbling with excitement about the science project she'd started at school. "I want to be just like you, Aunt Claire," she said, her words brightening my day. I promised to help her gather materials for her project the next time we met. Each little moment, a kind word from a friend, a small success at work, Lily's unfiltered joy helped mend the cracks left by years of feeling less than. But underneath it all, I knew the real healing would only begin when I found the courage to speak my truth, to set boundaries, and to stop letting my silence be mistaken for acceptance. I was beginning to sense a shift, a quiet readiness building inside me. It was not anger that stirred, but the need for dignity and the desire to finally claim my own worth. As the days stretched toward the next family gathering, I felt both apprehensive and quietly determined. I wasn't sure what would happen when I saw my parents and Melissa again, but I knew something in me had changed. I couldn't keep pretending their words didn't hurt, or that I could make myself small enough to escape notice. I was tired of carrying that loneliness home night after night. The next time we were all together, I would do my best to hold my ground. I owed myself at least that much. Monday morning came gray and drizzly, the city moving slower than usual. I woke up feeling unsettled, caught between wanting to forget the last family gathering and knowing I couldn't ignore it anymore. The apartment was unusually quiet. Willow curled up on my pillow socks, pressed against the windowsill, tracking the falling rain, and Rusty burrowed into his fleece blanket. I made coffee, staring out at the street below as the world blurred with every passing car. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't content to just let the days drift by. After feeding the cats and getting ready for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand. I scrolled through my contacts and hesitated, then pressed call for my therapist, Dr. Sylvia Winters. We'd been meeting off and on for several months, mostly to talk about the usual stress at work and the pressures of city life. Today, as her calm voice answered, I felt the old walls come down. I told her about Melissa's party, the joke that left me standing there like a child, the years of feeling small every time family gathered. Dr. Winters listened carefully, her questions gentle but direct. "What would you tell a friend in your shoes?" she asked. The question took me by surprise, and I paused before answering. "I'd tell her she deserves better," I said quietly. I'd tell her to set boundaries. Saying the words aloud made them feel real for the first time. After our call, I spent some time reading articles Dr. Winters had suggested, pieces about family dynamics, childhood roles that never really go away, and the way some families lean too hard on one child while letting the other carry everyone's disappointments. It was all so familiar, like reading a story written about my own life. I made a list in the back of a notebook, things I could control, ways to speak up, reminders that my value didn't hinge on approval from anyone else. I set the notebook aside, not sure yet how or when I'd use those words, but knowing I would. That evening, I sat down for dinner just as my phone rang. It was Lily, her voice small and uncertain at first. "Mom said I could call for 5 minutes," she said. I smiled, relieved to hear from her. She talked about school, about her microscope, and what she'd looked at so far: salt crystals, grass, even a drop of rainwater from the backyard. I encouraged her curiosity, asking questions, and laughing along with her discoveries. Then her voice dropped barely a whisper. "Mom and Dad are fighting again," she said. "Sometimes I wish I could stay with you and the cats when they yell." My heart tightened, knowing she was far too young to worry about adult problems. Before I could say more, Melissa's voice sounded in the background. "Time's up, Lily." I told her I loved her, promised we'd talk soon, and ended the call. Afterward, I stared at the dark screen, thinking about how much children see and hear even when we think they're not listening. I wanted to be the kind of aunt Lily could look up to, someone who wouldn't just take whatever was handed to her in silence. Friday morning, as I sipped my coffee and watched socks leap from the table to the window, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was David asking if we could meet for coffee. "Don't tell Melissa," he added. His note caught me off guard, but I agreed, curiosity mixing with apprehension. We met at a small cafe halfway between my office and his. David looked worn, his usual easy confidence replaced by lines of worry across his face. As we sat, he apologized for what happened at the party, admitting he'd noticed Melissa's comments had gone too far. "Things aren't good at home," he confided. "Melissa's struggling, and it comes out sideways. It's not really about you." I listened, realizing for the first time how much weight he carried. We talked quietly for nearly an hour about work, about the kids, and about how hard it can be to admit when things aren't perfect. After our meeting, I walked back to the hospital with a lot on my mind. It was clear now that my family wasn't as flawless as they pretended to be. Everyone was carrying something, even if they hid it behind jokes or busy schedules. I felt an unexpected relief knowing I wasn't alone in my struggles. That afternoon, I had lunch with Dr. Patricia Gray, my mentor. I told her about my conversation with David and how tired I was of always being the one to keep quiet. She nodded, sharing a story from her own life about setting boundaries with her brother when he couldn't accept her choices. "You have to stand up for yourself," she said. "Sometimes that's the only way people learn to respect you." By the time Sunday rolled around, I'd spent the whole weekend turning over conversations in my mind. I pulled out the notebook and looked at my notes again. As I got ready for dinner at my parents' house, I chose my clothes with care, opting for a blazer that made me feel capable, and a blouse in a color that always lifted my mood. I packed a small envelope of cards and letters from clients and students, not as proof, but as quiet reminders of my accomplishments. I rehearsed a few lines in the mirror, testing how they sounded aloud. Each time I said my choices deserve respect, it came out a little stronger. The drive to my parents' house was quiet, the sky streaked with fading sunlight. I parked out front, pausing a moment before going inside. My father greeted me at the door, his smile warm but tinged with concern. Inside the house looked just as it always had, neat, polished, a framed family photo on every wall. In the living room, Melissa sat on the couch with David and the kids. My mother hovered near the kitchen, fussing over the food. For a moment, I stood at the threshold, wondering if I'd really be able to say what needed to be said. Lily spotted me first, rushing over with her notebook, eager to show off her latest observations. I listened carefully, praising her curiosity and careful notes. As the rest of the family gathered for dinner, the conversation drifted, moving from my father's golf game to Melissa's charity work. When my mother finally asked about my job, I told her about the new project I was leading, the journal article on feline heart surgery, and the recent award I'd received. She nodded, smiling politely, but quickly turned the spotlight back to Melissa. "Tell Claire about the fundraiser you're planning, dear." I listened, but the old pattern was impossible to miss. When the meal ended and plates were cleared, Melissa brought up my cats again, her tone light but pointed. "Are they still your main companions on Saturday nights?" she asked, glancing at my mother. The room fell silent, eyes flicking back and forth. I felt the familiar urge to laugh it off or change the subject, but I didn't. Instead, I put my fork down and looked straight at Melissa. "That kind of comment is hurtful," I said, my voice steady. "My life is different, not less. I'm asking for the same respect I give you." The table grew even quieter, surprise flashing across my parents' faces. For the first time, I saw Melissa pause, uncertainty breaking through her usual confidence. My mother started to protest, but I interrupted, keeping my tone calm. "I've let this go for years, but it's not okay anymore. I've worked hard for what I have, and I'm proud of it." David looked at me, nodding in quiet support. I glanced at Lily, who was listening closely, her eyes wide. I realized she needed to see this too, to learn that it was possible to stand up and ask for better. When I left my parents' house that night, my nerves were raw, but my heart felt lighter. For the first time, I hadn't let myself disappear into the background. I drove home in the quiet, the city lights reflecting in the windshield. In the elevator up to my apartment, I felt a small, fierce hope start to take root. This was only the beginning. I didn't know exactly how my family would react next time we gathered, but I was ready to keep going. Something had shifted inside me, and I knew there was no going back. The days after that family dinner felt different, as if I'd stepped into new territory, and every small action mattered more. I moved through the week with a steadier sense of self, still feeling the tremor of nerves, but less willing to shrink myself. At work, I found a quiet confidence threading its way into the way I handled emergencies and taught my team. I carried those words, "My choices deserve respect," like a shield. My parents reached out midweek, inviting me over for Sunday dinner again. It was clear this was not a routine invitation. The message was careful, almost tentative. I accepted, determined not to fall back into old habits, no matter how the evening unfolded. Before I left, I glanced at the envelope of thank you notes and the photo of Lily with her microscope on my bookshelf. I slipped both into my bag, more for myself than anyone else. The evening air was heavy as I drove to my parents' house. Their street was quiet, front lawns glowing in the soft gold of late afternoon. My father greeted me at the door, and I could tell he was watching me closely, as if searching for some sign of how the last dinner had changed me. Inside, my mother fussed with the roast, and the house carried the familiar scent of rosemary and potatoes. Melissa and David arrived a few minutes later with the kids. Lily looked for me immediately, her face brightening as she spotted me, and Ben offered a shy wave. For a moment, it felt almost ordinary. We gathered around the table, my father asking about a conference I'd recently attended. I described the new techniques I'd learned, and for the first time, he asked follow-up questions. I noticed my mother listening, her face softer, her usual tension less apparent. Melissa stayed quiet, swirling her glass but not saying much. There was a lull. Then she asked how my furry friends were, her tone gentler than usual. "They're well," I replied. "And Lily's been a wonderful helper with them. She's learning so much." I glanced at Lily, who smiled, proud of her growing knowledge. As the meal went on, I could sense an undercurrent, a waiting, as if everyone was bracing for someone to step out of line. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I kept my voice steady, answering questions honestly and holding my ground. When the topic shifted to family, Melissa remarked that it must get lonely in the city sometimes, just me and the cats. This time I didn't deflect. "I have a full life," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "My work is important. My friends are family to me, and I'm content with the choices I've made." The room grew still, but I saw something flicker in Melissa's expression. Maybe surprise, maybe something else. My father started to say something, then paused. He cleared his throat. "I suppose we haven't always understood your choices," he admitted. "It's easy to fall into old patterns." My mother nodded, her eyes meeting mine for a long moment. "Sometimes I wish I'd been braver about the things I wanted too," she said softly. Later, as I helped clear the table, Melissa followed me into the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her voice lower than before. "I never meant for it to come out the way it does," she said. "I guess I thought if you were more like me, things would be easier for all of us." I put down the dish I was washing. "I used to think that too, but I can't keep pretending anymore." "We're different. I need you to respect that." She nodded, looking down. "I'll try. I mean it." I believed her, at least in that moment. The evening ended with Ben showing us a drawing he'd made, Lily excited to share the latest findings in her science journal. My parents lingered at the door as I left, both hugging me a little longer than usual. On the drive home, I felt a cautious relief, as if some barrier had finally begun to crack. I knew it would take more than one conversation or even one heartfelt apology to change the patterns of a lifetime. Still, I let myself hope that real change might be possible. The next morning, I woke to a text from Lily. She'd drawn a picture of the two of us looking at her microscope with a speech bubble saying, "Aunt Claire teaches me to see the invisible." I smiled, feeling the warmth of that small affirmation settle in my chest. It was a reminder that boundaries aren't just about keeping out the hurt. They're also about making space for new connections, the kind built on honesty and respect. As the week unfolded, I saw more signs of those small shifts. My mother called just to chat her questions about work and the cats more genuine. My father sent a newspaper clipping about women veterinarians breaking new ground. Melissa emailed a photo of Lily at her science fair, a blue ribbon pinned to her shirt. I responded with pride, telling her how much it meant to see Lily's interest growing. Still, I knew not to let my guard down. Old patterns have a way of resurfacing, especially when life grows stressful. But now, I was better equipped to meet those moments. I had found a voice I could trust, one that didn't tremble or fade when challenged. I promised myself that moving forward, I'd keep speaking up, not just for my own sake, but for the people who were watching and learning too. With another family gathering on the horizon, I felt a sense of readiness. There would be more hard conversations, more chances to hold firm and choose what kind of family I wanted to help shape. As I prepared for the days ahead, I felt a quiet conviction growing inside me. No matter what came next, I wouldn't go back to the way things were. As spring settled in, our family found itself drawn together for another Sunday meal. This time, the air felt charged with something new, like we were all waiting for the moment when old routines would finally give way. I arrived at my parents' house just after 3, the front garden blooming with daffodils and tulips, windows open to let in the mild breeze. Inside the living room hummed with quiet conversation. My mother arranged flowers at the table, while my father adjusted the radio, letting soft jazz play in the background. Melissa and David were already there, both looking tired but guarded, and the kids sat on the rug piecing together a puzzle. I set my bag by the door, greeting everyone in turn. My mother smiled, her voice a little too bright, and Melissa gave me a small nod. As we gathered for dinner, I could sense the tension, but something in me had changed. I was no longer afraid of these silences. When my father asked about my week, I shared news of a successful surgery at the hospital and a young resident I was mentoring. He listened closely, asking thoughtful questions. My mother surprised me by mentioning an article she'd read about animal-assisted therapy. "They say pets can do wonders for people in nursing homes," she said, her tone earnest. I nodded, grateful for her effort to connect. We moved through the meal, passing platters and stories, but the air grew heavier as dessert approached. Melissa seemed distracted, pushing her food around the plate. At one point, she glanced at me, her eyes red-rimmed. After dinner, while the kids ran outside, she pulled me aside into the hallway. "I need to talk," she said quietly. I followed her to the den, closing the door behind us. She sank into the armchair, wringing her hands. "Things are falling apart, Claire," she whispered. "David's business is struggling. We might have to move." She paused, voice trembling. "I've been drinking more than I should. I'm scared and I don't know who to talk to." For a moment, the weight of her vulnerability filled the room. I sat across from her, letting the silence settle. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "You don't have to go through this alone." She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry for the things I've said at your expense or when I made you feel small." I reached out and took her hand. "We all hurt each other, Melissa, but we can choose differently now." After a long pause, she told me she'd started seeing a counselor, hoping to understand herself better. "I want to be more than what everyone expects," she said. "I want to feel proud of who I am, not just what I do for others." I nodded, recognizing the courage it took to admit those words. We rejoined the family, and soon David joined our quiet conversation. His face was drawn, but there was relief in his voice as he spoke of new plans to restructure his business. "I never wanted to run a dealership," he confessed. "I always dreamed of teaching history." Melissa looked at him surprised, and for the first time I sensed a shared honesty growing between them. The rest of the evening took on a quieter mood. My parents listened as I described how I planned to help Lily with her science fair project, and Ben told us about his new love for drawing. My mother asked to see photos from my last conference, and my father promised to visit my hospital soon. Small steps, but meaningful. As the sun set, Melissa hugged me at the door. "I want to try again," she said. "Not just with you, but with myself." I hugged her back, feeling hope return in a way I hadn't expected. The car ride home was silent except for the radio, the world outside turning shades of deep blue. I let the events of the evening settle, knowing nothing would be perfect overnight. Still, I understood now that honesty and vulnerability could change everything, not just for me, but for all of us. That week, I noticed small changes. Melissa called to ask my advice on a decorating project, and David emailed a link to an online lecture he thought I'd enjoy. My mother sent a package of clippings about women in science, and my father mentioned reading about the impact of animal rescue. Lily sent me pictures of her latest microscope findings, her handwriting big and bold. Each gesture felt like another crack in the wall we'd all helped build. As the days grew longer and the air warmed, I found myself looking forward to family gatherings. The fear and shame I'd carried for so long had loosened their grip. We were starting over clumsy, imperfect, but honest. I saw my family more clearly now, each of us carrying wounds and dreams that deserved to be heard. The next Sunday, as I set the table for dinner in my own apartment, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The story wasn't finished. There were more hard talks and awkward moments ahead, but I was ready to meet them as myself, no longer hiding behind silence or resentment. The weeks that followed our quiet family reckoning were full of subtle but meaningful changes. There were no grand gestures, no sudden transformation, just a slow, steady shift in how we showed up for each other. My parents called to check in, asking about my work and the animals I'd cared for that week. My father even asked if he and my mother could visit the hospital to see what I did each day. When they arrived, I gave them a tour, introducing them to my colleagues and walking them through the surgical suite and recovery rooms. My mother watched as I examined a rescued kitten, her eyes wide with something close to wonder. My father asked questions about hospital management and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. As they prepared to leave, my mother squeezed my hand. "I had no idea," she whispered. "We're proud of you, Claire." I nodded, words catching in my throat. My relationship with Melissa changed as well. She started seeing a counselor regularly, and our conversations became less tense. One afternoon, she called to ask about an online interior design course. I always loved picking out fabrics and paint colors, she admitted. Maybe it's time to do something just for myself. I encouraged her, sensing a new kind of honesty between us. She told me she was cutting back on wine, focusing more on her kids, and making room for small joys. There were still awkward moments. Old habits don't disappear overnight. But when they happened, we were both more willing to pause, apologize, and start again. David and I formed an unexpected bond. He asked for my advice on financial planning and shared that he'd begun attending local history lectures on weekends. It feels good to remember what I loved before the business took over, he said. Lily grew more curious every week. She called to show me the latest slide under her microscope or to share her science fair progress. She talked about wanting to visit for a weekend, and Melissa, without hesitation, said yes. On the day of her visit, Lily bounced through my apartment, excited to explore with the cats and peek at new samples. She giggled as Willow batted at her shoelace and begged to examine Rusty's whiskers under the lens. At lunch, she looked up and asked, "Is it okay if I want to be different from Mom and Grandma?" I met her eyes and smiled. "The most important thing is to be true to yourself," I said. "There are lots of ways to be happy." As spring turned to summer, small rituals grew. My mother sent articles about women in science and photos of rescued animals. My father called after every family gathering asking how I felt about the visit. Melissa and I met for coffee, where she confessed it was hard to let go of perfection, but she was learning. "Watching you speak up at dinner made me realize I can do that too," she said. "Not just with you, but with myself." For the first time, I saw my sister as someone with her own struggles and regrets, not just the confident golden child I'd always envied. I began to feel the ground shift beneath me. I walked into family dinners with my head held higher, willing to share my successes and even my frustrations without apology. I learned to listen with compassion, but also to ask for the same in return. When old patterns surfaced, I addressed them gently but directly. The responses weren't always perfect, but the willingness to try was new, and that was enough. Lily's science fair came and went. She won a ribbon for her project on animal biology, and Melissa sent a photo of her beaming with pride. "Thank you for inspiring her," Melissa wrote. I printed the picture and placed it on my desk at work, a quiet reminder of how far we'd come. Each day, I found more confidence not just in my career, but in the way I navigated family. I saw that true justice in our lives is often delivered quietly through patience, courage, and the decision to choose respect again and again. The next family event was my father's birthday. We gathered at my parents' home, the mood lighter than it had been in years. Melissa prepared a simple meal, and everyone pitched in. Ben drew pictures at the table while Lily recited facts about cats to anyone who would listen. My mother asked about my latest research, and my father raised his glass in a toast. Not just to another year, but to all the ways our family had changed. As I helped clear the dishes, my mother stopped me in the kitchen. "You know," she said softly, "we're proud of the woman you've become, not despite your choices because of them." I smiled, feeling a deep, steady warmth settle in my chest. The work of healing wasn't finished, but the foundation had shifted. I knew that old hurts would sometimes return, that we'd all stumble now and then. But I also knew we had learned how to start again together, this time on better terms. As I walked home under a gentle summer sky, I thought about what justice really looks like. Sometimes it's loud and obvious, but more often it's quiet, a steady series of small steps towards something honest, lasting, and good. I was ready for whatever came next. Summer eased into early fall, and with it came a quiet sense of peace I hadn't known before. My family gathered for my father's birthday, but this time the house felt lighter, our conversations easier. Melissa prepared a simple meal, nothing showy, just honest food. We laughed over Ben's latest drawing and listened as Lily proudly shared the details of her blue ribbon science project. My mother asked about a recent research study. I'd led her interest genuine, and my father surprised me by mentioning an article about animal rescue he'd read just for me. As the evening drew to a close, my mother lingered with me in the kitchen. She dried dishes while I stacked plates. Her voice soft. "We're proud of you, Claire. Not in spite of your choices, but because of them." I looked at her, feeling years of old ache finally ease a bit. "We all make mistakes," she said. "But you taught us it's never too late to do better." I smiled, grateful for the room we'd found for one another, not perfect, but honest. Later, as I drove home along tree-lined streets, I realized how much had changed. The fear that once kept me silent had faded. I'd learned to speak up and trust that the people who truly loved me would listen. I'd seen my sister let go of perfection and ask for help. My parents open their minds and my niece grow confident in her own curiosity. Each of us in our own way had chosen a little more kindness over judgment. When I walked into my apartment, Willow met me at the door. Socks trotted close behind and Rusty lifted his head from his favorite cushion. I sank onto the couch, feeling their familiar warmth settle around me. My phone buzzed a message from Lily, asking if she could call for advice on her next school project. I realized then how every small stand I'd taken, every quiet boundary I'd set had shaped not just my life, but the people around me. Life still had its rough edges. Old habits surfaced from time to time, and not every conversation was easy. But the foundation was stronger now, built on respect and honesty, rather than keeping the peace at any cost. I was no longer the silent observer at the edge of my family. I'd claimed my place not just as a daughter or a sister, but as someone worth listening to, just as I am. If my story reminds you of your own journey, or if you've ever had to stand your ground in the face of misunderstanding, I hope you'll hold on to your worth too. You deserve to live and love by your own measure, surrounded by people who see you clearly. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. If you'd like, I'd love to hear your story, whether it's in the comments, a quiet reflection, or simply by listening in. Take care of yourself, and remember your voice matters.